Well, good morning and welcome back to another wonderful Lord's Sunday. Welcome to each and every one of you to our Sunday school class. We're going to go ahead and begin to dive into material. I believe that we did not, that some folks weren't able to see or view Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through 3 or so from last week. And so here is that clip for you. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead into chapter 10, and if you could pause the video and have one person read Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through, let's do verses 1 through 9. 1 through 9. Thank you so much. All right, so how I'm going to categorize Daniel chapter 10, it's going to tell us some important things. We're going to have some interesting things to work through very quickly. But chapter 10 is really kind of a setup for chapters 11 and 12. Okay? And so the first thing we see here is a date. This is a date in a third person, meaning that perhaps somebody is taking down Daniel's words at this time. How do we know that? Because of things like this. And he, right? It's a third person, meaning that somebody else other than Daniel is writing it. It says this: in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who is named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict, and he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. So we have a timestamp, 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, right? So the Babylonian Empire has already fallen. The next king, Cyrus, has already come in. And we get a date, it's the 3rd year. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. Here, the week is going to be a normal term, right? 7 days. Okay, it's no longer a year anymore. What's the significance of this? Well, the significance of this, and we'll go in a little bit further. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. Just an interesting little tidbit here. It looks like Daniel's fasting from meat and wine was not for his whole life. Remember back in Daniel chapter 1, when he was in training, so to speak, he ate only vegetables and water. It looks like now, because of this specific mention of eating no wine or meat when it would have been just his normal thing otherwise, it seems that maybe that vow sort of ended at some point in his life. Okay. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river. Right here, we then need to play with dates in the passages to understand what's going on. On the 24th day of the 1st month. Here's what we need to know. The 1st month was when Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were celebrated. These were celebrations. There were celebrations about the great deliverance which God had given to his people Israel, namely in the Exodus events and the coming out of Egypt and moving into the Promised Land. The Passover is celebrated on the 14th day of the month. Okay? The 14th day of the month. On the Feast of Unleavened Bread is celebrated from the 15th to the 21st of the month, which means that Daniel would have actually been fasting all the way through the preparation and the celebrations of these 2 feast events. Right? He's fasting. Why would he fast during such a time of celebration? This would be like fasting through Christmas or Advent, right? Well, Christmas and Advent is usually that time of year when we're celebrating, right? There's no need to necessarily fast, at least for these long portions of time. And yet here we're seeing him fast. So what's going on? Well, to understand it, you actually have to go back to the clue in the first verse. It says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. What happens in year 1? Well, let's turn to another book and we'll see. But in year 1, Cyrus releases the exiles back to Judah. So if you go to Ezra, and this is going to be in the book of Ezra 1, 1 to 3. It says, "Look, in the first year of the Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all this kingdom. Thus says Cyrus, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem. Whoever is among you of all of his people, may his God be with him, and rebuild, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of Israel." So that's year 1. Daniel's in year 3 now. That's year 1. What happens in year 2? Let's take a peek. And here we're going to Ezra, chapter 3, verse 8. Whoops. Ezra 3, verse 8. "Now in the second year after their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, in the second month, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jehozadak made a beginning, together with the rest of their kinsmen, the priests and the Levites, and all who had come into the captivity." What do they make a beginning of? Well, they're going to be making a beginning of the temple of God. Okay? They're going to be, and you can see that specifically in verse 9, "together supervise the workmen in the house of God." Okay? When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, right? So that's in the second year of Cyrus, king of Persia. What happened in the third year? Let's take a look here. Or I should say by the third year. Ezra 4:24. "Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped, and it ceased until the second year of the king of Darius, king of Persia." So what's happened? Why is Daniel mourning and fasting in the third year? Right? Well, he's mourning and fasting because work on the temple in Jerusalem has stopped. It's like seeing the promises of God fulfilled, and you're like, yes, this is happening just according to prophecy. This is how it should be. This is wonderful. The temple is being restored, and then all of a sudden, boom, doors are shut and slammed on the face, and it's another one of those situations where you're going, why and how could this be happening? And Daniel then is fasting and mourning, seeking the face of God. How and why could this be happening? How and why could this be happening? All right. Well, thank you so very much for watching that clip, and let's go ahead and dive into verse 4 here in Daniel chapter 10. Now, here we go. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. Where is the Tigris River? That's a great question. Let's take a look. So here is our map. This is from the Zondervan Bible Atlas. And so the pages, we're going to have to work a little bit with the pages here. But you'll see here that the Tigris River is running right here. The Euphrates River is running right here. Somewhere up in here is going to be Nineveh, I believe, by the Euphrates. But down here you'll see that you have the Tigris River right by kind of Babylon, but also then you have Susa. And so Daniel is somewhere out here by the Tigris River. Okay, it's almost like he's looking out towards Susa at that time. So that's where Daniel's going to be. Here's the Tigris River one more time. The Tigris River, and Daniel's going to be somewhere out there. And so he lifts his eyes and look, and behold, a man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words was like the sound of a multitude. Now we need to kind of understand that this is a man clothed in linen, right? So Daniel knows the differences between angels and men, and he's declaring that this is some sort of man. He's clothed in linen, right? Clothed in linen garments. The belt of fine gold. This phrase right here, gold from Uphes, really just means very fine gold. At least that's what commentators are going to think. They're just going to say, hey, this means the best of the best gold that you could find. Around his waist, his body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, right? So that idea of the capturing of the appearance of lightning might remind us of places like in the book of Matthew, where the angels are described in the resurrection scene, and their clothes shine white as snow, or white like lightning almost. So you kind of have that idea, and here his face is like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. The sound of his words is like the sound of a multitude. It's rich, it's vast. One commentator, which I don't agree with, thought that the words might then be confusing to understand. I'm not quite sure about that, but I think it's more of just the magnitude and majesty of the voice. And so this is what the appearance of this man looks like when he comes to see Daniel in this vision. Now, with this picture or this idea, one of the things that we need to think about or check out is Revelation chapter 1, because there's going to be some correspondence between this picture of the man clothed in linen and Jesus in the book of Revelation. So let's take a look here, Revelation 1. And where you're going to go down to is really Revelation 1, verse 9 and on. Okay, take a look at this. It says, Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. In the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, right? Again, like a man, clothed with a long robe. So here in Revelation you have the long robe instead of linen, with a golden sash around his chest, right? So a little bit of a difference there, but you still have that indication of gold. The hairs of his head was like white wool, like snow. So here again, you have that kind of connotation of the brightness of the light within the face, but in Revelation, the white like snow is going to be a reflection of the Ancient of Days from earlier in Daniel. Okay, because John in this vision, or God in this vision, is correlating several different things here. So it's not exact, but let's take a look at this. His eyes were like a flame of fire. And if you're staying in Daniel, you'll also, believe you'll see that, right? Verse 6, his eyes like flaming torches, right? Here you have his feet like burnished bronze, right? His feet like burnished bronze. What does Daniel chapter 10 verse 6 say? His arms and legs like the gleam of a burnished bronze, okay? His voice in Revelation, his voice was like the roar of many waters, right? You have that majesty indication. You have that majesty sort of implication of the voice. And then, of course, in Daniel chapter 10, verse 6, it's his words like the sound of a multitude. And so one of the things that we can see and right away is simply this idea that at least in Revelation, the Lord is giving the vision of Revelation to John, and the Lord is weaving together these indications, these direct signposts to connect Jesus, the Son of God, with both the Son of Man in earlier on in Daniel. I believe it would be Daniel chapter, take a quick look. Probably Daniel chapter 7, and the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7, but then also corresponding it with this figure found in Daniel chapter 9. Right? And so we're seeing, at least from a New Testament perspective, from the book of Revelation, looking back, that this figure in Daniel chapter 10. This figure in Daniel chapter 10 is Jesus. Now, are there other signposts of this in the book of Daniel? Well, yes, there are. So let's take a look just at a few of them. Number one, in Daniel chapter 10, this man is meant to be linked back to Daniel chapter 7, with the Son of Man figure appearing there. Okay. And we've already kind of talked about that just for a moment. He's meant to be linked back to that. The next he's supposed to be linked back to is the Prince of the Host in Daniel chapter 8, verse 11. The Prince of the Host. And if you recall, when we went through Daniel chapter 8 in that Sunday school class, we actually went on the journey and or the hunt for the Prince of the Host, and we went back to Joshua and we took a look at that figure, and we understand that is Jesus, right? That's the Jesus before his incarnation. Here, this man, again, some of the commentators will say this is Gabriel. Impossible, right? Gabriel is named Gabriel in the book of Daniel, and he appears as an angel, right? And this is a man. Number two, the signpost of this person, according to the New Testament, links it with Jesus, right? And so that's another indication. Some commentators will say this man is the Archangel Michael, but this man refers to the Archangel Michael in the third person, right? So what we're supposed to see is this man in Daniel chapter 10, verse 5, with these characteristics. We are meant to see the Son of Man. We are meant to see Jesus. We are meant to see the Prince of the Host in the Old Testament, linked with this figure who is now appearing before Daniel to give this vision. Okay. For that too, if you want more information, we're not going to go through every detail, but Michael Heiser has a wonderful in-depth book called Angels, and on right around page 72, he actually discusses this figure in depth, and so that's a place to go further, although I think for basics, what we've just gone over is perfectly fine. So let's continue on then here in the vision that Daniel is having. It says verse 7, "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves." So Daniel is seeing this vision, but this is more than like a waking dream. This is something that is actually happening. The spiritual being, i.e. Jesus before his incarnation, is actually present, and his presence is felt to the terror of all those around Daniel. Right, so and we might expect God's presence to do just that, right? It instills and inspires terror. So here then we got verse 8. "So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed," and you hear this again, emphasis, "I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground." What does this mean? Most commentators aren't going to go here, but what I would say is this. The suggestion would be, by the New Testament time, sleep had become a way of expressing that somebody was dead. Right, so remember the gospel story of Lazarus, when Jesus says, "Lazarus has fallen asleep, and now we're going to go and wake him up." And Thomas goes, "He'll be okay if he's just asleep, right? There's no reason for us to go up there." And then Jesus says, Lazarus is dead, right? Paul then talks about in Ephesians chapter 4, first those who have fallen asleep and then the rest of us. And what is that? It's a euphemism for being dead. And so here what I would suggest is that if this is a deep sleep, it really is going to be a deep one, or perhaps he even fell down and died, right? And I think that the text can kind of withstand that. But this is a position of prostration before the living God, right? This is an attitude of worship and one of not just worship, but also one of perhaps dying or mimicking dying, right? So take a look then here, verse 10, behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. Okay, so this being here, Jesus, before he was incarnated, was able to touch him and be able to restore him to awareness and awakeness, right? So if he was sleeping, he was restored to awareness at least. If he was dead, it means he was raised from the dead, so to speak. Okay. So, and behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. When he had spoken to this word to me, I stood up trembling. The idea here is that Daniel could not resist the commands and the words of the one speaking, right? If it was just up to his own power, he would not be able to stand. So he needs the power of God. He needs the strength of God. And that's what's being passed through this Jesus before he was incarnated right into Daniel. Then he said to me, verse 12, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. Right? So God knew that Daniel was going to pray. God instilled that prayer in Daniel. He instilled the fasting in Daniel. And as soon as Daniel started, the one who is Jesus before he's incarnated, right, the spiritual being who's Jesus before the incarnation, came or began to come to Daniel. But take a look. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia. This is fascinating because Jesus, of course, is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, right? He's the ruler of rulers. In this context, he would be the Prince of Princes. Michael is one of the chief princes. And so the being that is here with Daniel at this moment is someone of higher authority than Michael. Michael is one of the chief princes. And Jesus, of course, before the incarnation and after the incarnation is Lord of Lords, King of Kings. Here he would be the Prince of Princes, or the Prince of Rulers, or the Chief of Chiefs, so to speak. Right? So then here's the question. How could he be withstood or resisted? For these 21 days that Daniel has been fasting. Very simple. It's probably just because he's not trying to break through. It is at this point the Lord's will to let his servants battle these other spiritual beings and rulers of these other kingdoms. Now take a look here. Just want to refresh. The prince of the kingdom of Persia, the ruler of the kingdom of Persia, that's going to be a spiritual being, right? That's a spiritual being who's in opposition to God. And remember this, this is simply, again, this is the Deuteronomy 32 worldview that Michael Heiser will talk about, but Deuteronomy 32. Here we go, verse 8. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Right? And so we have this idea that there are spiritual beings out there, and these nations are actually ruled by other spiritual beings, by other sons of God, right? By creations of God that are spiritual. And so we have that very clearly laid out in Daniel 10. In Daniel chapter 10 with this, right? Now, is it unusual for God to kind of just sit back and let his servants deal with other servants? No, actually, it's not necessarily unusual, but when one God wants to go, he then moves and ends all opposition. Why do I say this? Take a quick look at me again with me. Revelation. And I'm going to move here very quickly, and so forgive the scrolling text. Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. And Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 is something that happens, really it seems to happen based on context after the Messiah is born, i.e. Jesus is incarnated. He's now a human being. He's a baby. And then we have this war in heaven. So when you're reading Revelation chapter 12, sometimes people will say, well, Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 and on is describing something that happened before creation, or maybe before the Garden of Eden, or maybe right in the midst of the Garden of Eden, or something like that. And this war arose, and there's rebels, and there's rebel angels. Actually, that's not the image that's given in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, we had chapter 12, verse 7 and on. This war is happening after the Messiah, right? After the incarnation. And I should clarify that this is going to be an event after the Messiah is incarnated, i.e. his birth, right? Because that's what Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6 is talking about. It's the birth of the Messiah. So here we go, Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, right? What's fascinating about that is God doesn't seem to lift a finger against Satan. He has Michael and his angels fight Satan, but the king does not do anything. And obviously, God is empowering his angels and Michael to win. So obviously the Lord is on their side, but he's not stepping off his throne, so to speak, to throw lightning bolts or whatever else, right? He's simply calmly sitting back, and Michael, one of the chief princes, the archangel Michael and his angels, defeat Satan and his angels, right? So this is not uncommon then if we were to go back to Daniel chapter 10, and I think we're around verse 15. I'm sorry, it's verse 13, Daniel chapter 13. For the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. It could be that Jesus is simply, being a king and not partaking in the fighting, though he's present at the battle, and letting Michael, one of the chief princes, helping him, right? So that's not unusual. This isn't like, oh no, there's a spiritual being, the kingdom of Persia, the king or the prince of Persia, who's able to trick God, or he's able to rival Jesus or something like that. That's not the case at all. It's just a matter of what is suitable for the King of Kings to do or not do. And we know in the end, like in Revelation chapter 19, when God, through Jesus, does pick up a battle, Jesus rides in on a white horse, and all he does is speak, and all of his enemies are slain on the spot, right? So this is not, in verse 13 and 14, we're mistaken if we think that Jesus, before he's incarnated, is actually fighting, right? He's not. the angel Michael, one of the chief princes, is the one who's doing all of that. And in the fullness of time, when it was right, after these 21 days, Jesus came to help Daniel. Okay, what's he going to do? And he comes to make you understand, that's Daniel, what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. So again, all the vision then that's going to happen, especially in verses 11, in chapters 11 and 12, is something that happens in latter days. That doesn't necessarily mean latter days from our perspective, although it could, and we're going to get there. Okay, but primarily it means latter days from Daniel's perspective. And all of it is actually going to be mainly about what happens to your people, what happens to Daniel's people. Remember that Daniel had fasted because he's concerned that the building project of the temple had stopped in the third year, right? And so he's in the third year of Cyrus, and so he's disturbed by that, and he's fasting, and now there's going to be an answer given about what happens to his people. Okay. Verse 15, when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was mute. Right, again, so he is standing up at this time, and yet he turns to the ground and is then mute. He just can't speak. Behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips. This is the same person, right, being described in another way. One in the likeness of the children of man. This is the man in the linen garments from earlier in chapter 10. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Right? Again, this no breath left in me. Again, no commentators go here. No commentator that I've read will say this. But from my perspective, this almost seems like an idea that he's kind of in this state of almost being dead. Right? Now, again, he's standing up at this point. He is mute. If he's standing and talking, he's obviously breathing, but the idea is that there's no strength or power left in him at all. There's no strength for life left. Again, you have that I retain no strength and no strength. What's fascinating here is this idea of pains here in verse 16. That word, according to Joyce Baldwin on page 202 of her commentary, pains is used in childbirth, right? So that word vision pains is also used for the act of birthing a child. And as many women know, that is an extreme sort of pain, right? It's a terrible sort of pain that's happening. And that's what Daniel uses as a metaphor for his own pain. It's like that. Now, of course, everyone's going to say, well, he doesn't know what it's like to birth a child. He can only see the pain. Yes, but that's the sort of pain that he saw is what he is now describing as happening in him. Again, when having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me, right? That's Jesus from earlier on. This is Jesus before the incarnation. And he said, O man greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you, be strong and of good courage. Notice that this is like a command of the Lord. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, my Lord, speak, for you have strengthened me. So some sort of grace, some sort of power, real power for life has gone out of this figure, right, of Jesus before his incarnation on earth, has gone out of him and into Daniel. Daniel's been quickened, he's been strengthened, he's now back on his feet and been revitalized by this figure. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? But now, right, so there's the question, do you know why I have come to you? Well, you're going to be showing us a vision, okay? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these, except Michael, your prince. Now again, this is fascinating, especially this sort of language here. It means that even over Israel, God has set a spiritual being to rule as like a co-vizar. Now this is under God, and it's under the angel of Yahweh, which is Jesus, right? It's under those figures, and yet it's still someone that is a chief prince who is on the Lord's side. And we remember, that this is basically the whole world, and all the spiritual beings that govern all these other nations are against God and are against the promised land. We should not be surprised about this, that the world is against the people of God, right? In the New Testament, Jesus will say this, do not be surprised if the world hates you. They hated me before they hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. Therefore, the world hates you. Right? And he's talking to his disciples there in John chapter 15, and he's describing the people of God's relationship with the world. Here's another good one. I think it's not Psalm 82. It's Psalm 2 that I want. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. Right now, that's human kings, but the principle is there too, that it's also the spiritual rulers have all broken they want to break the bonds of God, right? They don't want his rule. And then you have the response, he who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Right, again, you have that sense that they're against the Lord. Psalm 82 is then the next one. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. The idea in this psalm is that God actually judges other spiritual beings who are supposed to be ruling over these parts of the nations or different geographical regions, and they're not doing well. Right? They're actually walking around in darkness and in being blind, such that the foundations of the earth are shaken by their error and by their injustice. Okay? So there's just some senses of these other spiritual beings being in rebellion. Let's go ahead back to Daniel chapter 10. Oh, here we go. Okay, verse 20. But I will tell you what's inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael your prince. So that's something that's described in this book of truth. The idea here is actually that, but now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. That's going to be the end of Persia when that happens. But behold, when he goes out, the prince of Greece will come. Okay, behold, the prince of Greece will come, i.e. the ruler of Greece, the spiritual being who rules over Greece, will then come to fight, really against Persia, but then again against all the other territories as well. All right, that finds us at the end of chapter 10, which is wonderful. And I think that is then where we will stop for this particular recording. Okay, thank you so very much, and God bless you all. Bye-bye.